everyone, my name is Ivan Sayers. I am a fashion historian. I've collected vintage clothing, period costume, whatever since I was in high school, so it's over 60 years. I have a very good collection of things, men's, women's and children's clothing back to the 1730s and a few pieces of fabrics that are older than that. Today we're going to talk about the structure involved in putting an Edwardian figure together, the process. We start with a foundation garment. Of course, it is a foundation garment. It's like a structure of a building or any other object. You have to start with a foundation, and that's what we're going to talk about. The Edwardian corset is called a straight-fronted corset, and the reason it develops is as a reaction to the Victorian style of corset, which had a different shape to it. It had a different approach to making the waistline small. The idea was to make the waistline as small as possible at any cost. And a lot of the smallness of the waist depends on exaggerating other parts of the figure. This is true in the Victorian world and the Edwardian world. The aesthetic of the Edwardian world goes from about 1897 or 8 through to the beginning of the First World War. The chronological date for the Edwardian period is actually 1901 to 1910, so there's a bit of flexibility there. The first corset I want you to look at, though, is this one, which is from the 1880s or 1890s. This is the standard form for almost all Victorian corsets. This one happens to be a late example. The important part for us is that the busk, which is that strip of steel right down the center front, it hooks together so that you can take it off without taking the lacing out every time. The lacing is at the back. The lacing goes from the top down to the waist and from the bottom up to the waist, so that you can get the maximum amount of pressure right there at the center of the body. As the corset is tightened, it pulls the waistline in, and the busk is flexible enough so that it will curve to the shape of the abdomen. As it's pulled in, though, against the soft flesh of the body, it pulls the flesh towards the spine, and in doing that, some of the flesh is pushed up and more of it is pushed down, and you get a belly. This is not an aesthetic problem as long as there is some sort of compensation for that roundness in some other aspect of the skirt. And what they do is they put a fairly substantial pad, a bustle pad, across the back of the hips. So by increasing the size of the back end, the stomach looks flatter than it actually is. So this is an illusion. This is about creating some form of perfection, which is an abstract. It's not reality. The consequences of this kind of bust, though, are a problem, because it can be uncomfortable, especially if you bend. If you bend to sit down or pick something up, or you're on a horse or what have you. As you bend forward, the busk intrudes into your abdomen there and causes discomfort, and it can cause medical problems. Many girls, especially girls of very wealthy households, started to wear corsets when they were very young. There are examples of sort of year and a half, but that's a bit unusual. But usually by the time a girl was about 3, it was expected that she would have at least some sort of foundation garment that she would wear on a regular basis. So this pushes in, it causes a discomfort problem, and it makes the stomach stick out. In 1898, a French woman named Madame Gauche-Sarrat invented a kind of corset that had a perfectly straight busk to it. The sides of the corset were cut up higher over the hips, so instead of bending the body forward at the waist, you bent forward from the hips. So this was slightly freer. This was, the bust was made to be more or less perfectly straight, and instead of drawing the flesh back towards the spine, it drew the spine forward to the front of the corset. This was the introduction of what becomes the Edwardian corset. One of her reasons, Madame Gauche-Surratt, one of her reasons for developing this corset was that young women were interested in sports, and especially the bicycle. And if you're leaning forward over the handlebars of a bicycle, this corset is not going to work for you. So the new corset was the issue. So by 1902, the straight-fronted corset was actually being advertised in the Woodward's mail-order catalog printed in Vancouver. And that catalog catered to women who lived up the coast, in the farming communities, all sorts of remote communities, logging camps, and so on and so forth. So my point with that being is that the straight-fronted corset caught on very quickly and was even available in mail order. When a woman got dressed, the first thing she did was to put on her shift. And that's what you see here. That's what this is. The older ones are more likely to have short sleeves. The more modern ones are sleeveless. That's not always the case, but it's a consistency. So this is the straight-fronted corset of the style that starts at the end of the 1890s. So the busk is what I'm fastening now. It's held in place with a series of studs and rings. Earlier corsets, quite a bit earlier, in the 1840s, they were solid across the front, which meant you really had to take all the lacing out every time you wanted to take the garment off, and this is not good. I don't have any specific history for this corset, but I got this one in Vancouver, and I have another one exactly the same that came from Victoria. So chances are these were available here. You can see at the back how the lacing is arranged, and the lacing is done so that the laces will come out of a pair of eyelets right at the center of the small of the back, so that you can actually put the corset on yourself. The woman would reach around and hook her thumbs into that loop and then tighten it, so that it works for independence. There's always the suggestion that women needed help getting into their corsets, and certainly I'm sure it was welcome when that was possible, but it wasn't always necessary. There's a concept that we refer to as beauty by impairment. That means essentially the more handicapped a woman is by her clothing, the greater her status and her appeal. It implies that she has servants. But many people didn't have servants, even in those days when wages were so low people could afford servants. The laces are conspicuously long, and that's partly so that there's room to expand them, but also oftentimes they fasten them like that so that you could get that extra little bit of punctuation right at the waistline. The primary function of a corset is to make the waistline small. That we've accomplished. The waistline is at its natural level. It is tiny. The busk does still slightly follow the curve of the body, but it's much straighter than the earlier one, as you can see. The hips are almost the same, but oftentimes they are cut up quite high to make the movement of the hips quite free. The spine is drawn forward. We will put padding here, and that will make the stomach appear to be even smaller than it actually is. So, the bustle pad, not particularly mysterious. It goes on across the back, and it fills up the flat space across the back of your hips. The bustles have 2 or 3 functions. They add to the volume of the hips so that the waistline will look smaller. They add dimension at the back so that the stomach will look flatter. And also the bustle actually acts as a foundation for the train of the skirt. So the train, which is the part that drags across the floor at the back, generates from the small of the back, and it creates a nice long sweeping line as opposed to one which could just come out from behind the knees or something like that. It's a different effect, and That's not appropriate for the Edwardian period. We're going to dress this woman for about 1904. So we're building her body shape. It doesn't really matter too much what you start off with because you're going to alter it all. These are the bloomers, the underpants, the under drawers, whatever you wish to call them. They are essentially two legs attached to a waistband. So in this instance, we have a mannequin with a pin supporting it, so it makes it a bit awkward, but you can understand how this would work for the average woman. So there we go. And you can see that we are building a physique. We're building an Edwardian figure, which to us looks exaggerated to the point of almost deformity, but the truth is it's like a sculpture. You keep adding elements and then you refine. So this is what's going on now. There we have her figure. We have made the body shape. So we have her bloomers, the shift, the corset. This is the corset cover or camisole. And again, this is about refining. We're hacking away at the rough edges and trying to make it more smooth, more sophisticated, more somehow natural. It's not really natural, but you don't want lumps and bumps in the finished product. It has to have the appearance the underwear should be inconspicuous. So that's what we're working on here. Buttons, hooks and eyes, perhaps. Snap fasteners appear in clothing about this time. Before that, it's all hooks, eyes, drawstrings, and the like. So there's the body shape for the chest, the body for the hips. And now we put on, well, that should be tucked in. In the 1890s, the corset was put on over a lot of the underwear. After 1900, a lot of the underwear is put on over the corset, and so it's a mixture. And there are different methods in the process depending on personal preference. The bustle pad sometimes goes under the corset depending on how much lift the woman would want. In the 1890s, she would have worn 5 petticoats at a time because the skirt was supposed to be conical. The more volume and more solidity in the petticoats, in the shape of the skirts and so on, the better. They didn't want to expose the shape of the legs. This was indelicate at best. So, but that was, again, it was created because of this issue about the fullness of the stomach. Once a straight-fronted corset is usable, that flat stomach is something they really want to exploit. They want to show this off because this is how you prove you're modern. It was a novelty. It looked healthier, younger, presumably. Who knows? It might have just been novelty as such. So that small flat stomach is really, really important. We have the bustle pad, so it actually makes the stomach, the whole lower part of the body move towards the back. The chest is padded. It is magnificent but mysterious. There are no specific shapes involved with the shape of the chest. So this is the powder pigeon chest. You should have that sort of silhouette. Now, after 1900, with the straight-fronted corset, they reduced the number of petticoats from 5 to 3. So the last petticoat I put on is actually 2. We've sewn them together for efficiency's sake. So now we've built the shape of the dress. Now we put the dress on. The dress is cotton. It appears to be brown. It's actually a transparent black fabric printed with thistles, and then it's lined in cotton fabric. So what happens is you get an amalgamation of the two colors and it almost looks like shot silk. That's the idea. It's an inexpensive dress. It would have been something that you would have been able to wash. This one has never been washed. The original sizing is still in the fabric. So here we have hooks and eyes again. It's in 2 pieces, but it's still considered to be a dress. I got the dress from a woman named Judith Gould many, many years ago, 40 years ago or so, and she bought it in a thrift store on Fraser Street in Vancouver. She paid $1.20 for it, which was amazing even then, and she was kind enough to trade me for something I had that she wanted that would fit her. This was too tall for her. So most of the bodices, formal bodices anyway, are heavily boned and structured. This is all built in, and they're stiffened, as are the corsets, with whalebone. The whalebone grows from the upper jaw of the baleen whales, and it has a texture sort of like hair and fingernails combined, and it will be, you can split it lengthwise and create long flexible strips. It is practical for corsets because with the heat of your body it will actually bend, and then when you take the corset off it will retain the new shape. So over a period of time the corsets actually get more and more comfortable. So we want this to fit tightly. There is a small belt sewn in across the back there, which we tie across the front. Now the pouter pigeon chest looks a bit distorted to us, especially when you start to really drape it the way it was intended to be draped. And we can see here that this hemline dips down. That tells us how much this is supposed to puff out, because that should be straight, and that we accomplish that straight line by pulling this out. But I'm going to do it once the skirt is on, because if I overdo it, it's impossible to get it straightened out again without taking everything apart. So here is the skirt. Again, you can see the red lining. In the 1890s, the skirts appeared to be perfectly conical and solid. After 1900, they drape, and the woman becomes an example of Art Nouveau, which is sort of the early 20th century interpretation of hippie stuff, where everybody's supposed to look organic instead of structured. In the 1890s, the silhouette is based primarily on angles. After 1900, it's based on curves. Even the print of the Scottish thistle here is all curvilinear, and she is going to be all curvilinear. I've got her a bit high, but not too much. So now we have that pouter pigeon chest happening there, but it should come out quite a bit and sit like that. It looks weird to us because of our modern aesthetic, but it is appropriate for its time period. Then you want the punctuation of a tight belt. That adds what you want. It creates definition, it finishes it off. This should come to a V. It's sort of, the idea is that it appears that her waist is only that wide. So it's an illusion again, but that's the concept behind it. Then, absolutely the last touch is the collar. And that is the Edwardian figure, the early Edwardian figure. And you can see that the skirt drapes. When the hat is put on, her hair would be piled up in a big pompadour roll, and the hat would sit slightly lifted at the front, but slightly forward at the front, and there would be a curving line that would follow the line of the hat, curving down the back of her head, passing through the small restriction of the neckline, over this big pouter pigeon full chest, through the smallness of the corseted waist, over the curve of the bustle pad, and then flaring off into the skirt. London for here is to illustrate this illustration, prove that this is reality for the world in 1901. Now, the idea is to create the impression of youthfulness because it's such a tiny waist, but in fact, women were considered to be their most attractive between the ages of 35 and 45. So this is actually an outfit which is designed to cover you in a very, very modest, dignified way. So you are covered from the chin down. This is all part of the legacy of Victorian morality. But at the same time, even though that is all modest, the display element is there. She's very, very feminine because the figure is so conspicuous and so exaggerated. This magazine is the Delineator magazine, which was a woman's fashion magazine put up by the Butterick pattern people. So you could buy that pattern to make this kind of dress. This is an American company, but there were issues printed and sold in Canada specifically. All the advertisings were Canadian companies, and right there it says Toronto. You would have been able to buy this publication right here in Millardville, I'm sure. Anyway, I hope that was of some interest to you. I'm more than happy to take questions. If you would like to phone the museum, they can pass your number along to me and we can solve any mysteries that might have occurred to you. I appreciate the invitation from Mackin House and the staff here inviting me to be with you. So thank you very much and keep safe.